Welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von B. Obviously, it's been a while since I made a video, at least a video like this. I think it was towards the end of 2024 when I last did an album review. I've kind of moved on. It's not really something I'm interested in anymore, but I got inspired recently and thought, why not? You never have to give up on something entirely. So I recently decided I didn't really know the music of Deep Purple, so I checked out this greatest hits collection, A Fire in the Sky. I think of Deep Purple as one of those bands that's famous, but not really. Like, I guess I knew they were the Smoke on the Water group and that they did a cover of Neil Diamond's Kentucky Woman, but other than that, I didn't know any of the songs on here, or probably really any of their songs any of their songs that are not on here. I guess that's the funny thing. You realize there's so many famous people, groups, etc. in the world that things can be famous and also kind of obscure at the same time. So Deep Purple are a band from the tail end of the British invasion, when those bands are starting to move towards a harder sound, and along with groups like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, even though they're considered part of mainstream rock and roll, they're also talked about as one of the founders of what we now think of as a more niche genre in heavy metal music. Now, I am not a metalhead. I do not like ridiculously long guitar solos or drum solos or songs where the singer is screaming so much you can't tell what they're singing. That said, Deep Purple is kind of like all the nice elements of metal without all the excess, at least on their greatest hits. For the most part, if you just think of metal as brash, loud electric guitar based music with maybe a bit of a sword and sorcery edge to it, that's what Deep Purple is. It's one of the relatively more broadly appealing versions of that. What makes this greatest hits collection kind of unusual is the order in which the tracks are structured. Often greatest hits collections will just be in a kind of random order, or they'll go from oldest to newest. This collection actually goes from newest to oldest. So the first track on the album, Hell to Pay, is from 2013, and the last, their cover of Hush, is from 1968. And it's pretty much perfectly in that reverse order. And that kind of makes a statement. Oftentimes people will think of bands as having their heyday, and with the odd exception here and there, even if a band continues to put out music decade after decade, people stop caring. They say this is pure nostalgia. It's dad rock. It doesn't really matter anymore. And the band or the team that compiled this are saying, no, they actually put out some of their best work when they were older men, so to speak. And I agree. Like, my favorite songs on this collection are the songs towards the beginning. I like that it forces you not to dismiss them. But in addition to the fact that these are songs that are recorded many years after the band was in its commercial heyday, part of the reason why they kind of have to force you to listen is that Deep Purple do not have the nice clean history of a band like the Beatles. So I've been thinking about why the Beatles are the most beloved band in the Anglophone world, or the whole world. And amongst other things, it's that everyone more or less can name their four members: John, Paul, George, and Ringo. And, maybe there are a few other bands like that. I guess ABBA, maybe Led Zeppelin, where the band pretty much only existed when the core members were there. And once they no longer wanted to, or in the case of Zeppelin, literally could all be together, they stopped existing as entities. By contrast, many bands persist on as brands even as members come and go. And some of them can do this kind of subtly, because even as some of the members change, the main characters stay around. Thinking about groups like the Rolling Stones or the Who or the Kinks or Kiss, they've had a lot of lineups, but the lead singer, the main songwriter, has been there from day one of fame, I guess you could say. But there are other really famous bands where you look for their John, Paul, George, and Ringo and realize it's really a mess. Black Sabbath, The Hollies, Fleetwood Mac is a really hilarious one. I was shocked when I found this Fleetwood Mac album in my grandparents' attic and wanted to listen to it, and I'm like, wait a minute, this does not sound like Stevie Nicks or Lindsey Buckingham. And I realized the band existed for years before its two most famous members were even involved. But beyond that, the Guess Who, the Byrds, AC/DC, all these bands, go onto Wikipedia and look at their timelines. It's ridiculous. Once you change 50% of your membership, maybe get a new name. You're not the same thing anymore. At least that's my gut instinct. And Deep Purple are, a excellent example of that. And there's part of me that's like, what does it even mean to talk about Deep Purple? Is Hush and Hell to Pay meaningly the same artist? They've had the same drummer, Ian Pace, great name for a drummer all these years, but are they really the same entity? I don't know. I think you can argue that as long as these changes happen sort of gradually, there's a kind of flow of progress. There's maybe a broader family dynamic where people are imitating the previous generation and there's some coherence. But yeah, there's a weird way in which a lot of bands are more like sports teams than they are like the Beatles or ABBA or one of these bands that actually is made up of very specific people. Deep Purple at least really acknowledges this messiness because they officially referred to all their different lineups as different marks. So the lineup that existed for their first three albums with lead singer Rod Evans is called Mark One. Then in their most famous era, Ian Gillan took over as lead singer, and bassist Roger Glover also joins. That's called Mark Two. That lasted for, I think, 4 albums. And then the lead singer is replaced yet again, this time by David Coverdale, who would later go on to start another band with no coherent identity in Whitesnake. That's Mark III. And after that, the changes become far harder to follow. I think there have been 9 marks in total. But when you look for at least who's the stable face, who's the Mick and Keith or the Paul and Gene of this band, there's not really a good answer. Like, Ian Gillan as the current vocalist and the one who's been there the most over the years is the most recognizable face, but he wasn't there at the beginning and he took some off years in the middle. Ian Pace, the drummer, he's been there the whole time, but who other than drummers is going to really think of a drummer as the leader of the band? Richie Blackmore, the longtime guitarist, was kind of the leader of the band, I sense, for much of its history, but now he's been gone from the band for 3 decades. John Lord, the classically trained keyboard player, probably was the most distinct part of the Deep Purple sound. They were a band that didn't need to really distort their amps because they could use organs to get a big kind of dark sound. He died in 2012 and also was never really the leader of the band, as far as I can tell, even though he kind of produced the signature sound. So, it's not a band with an easy face. It's very tricky naming all the members in a truly satisfying way. I mean, you could probably call Ian Gillan the singer, but David Coverdale recorded some pretty important Deep Purple songs. Like, what do you do when you're trying to create an identity for the band in your head? So I don't know, maybe this doesn't bother some people so much, but it's the kind of thought process that plays around in my head. And I guess the reason I ended up making this video is, despite the fact that there's this voice inside me that's saying, what even is Deep Purple? Is Deep Purple even a thing? How can you have a band where virtually none of the major members have been in it half the time? I don't know, but I really like this collection, and if nothing else, I'd like to celebrate these songs. So, as I said, the first few songs are from their most recent era, and Ian Gillan is someone whose voice, at least up until this point, and I think until very recently, had not lost a step with age. He has a very powerful singing voice, but not in a subtle way, where you'd listen to him and say, yeah, he carries a tune, but you don't right away notice he's an amazing singer. The very first track on here is produced by Bob Ezrin, who did the Destroyer album for Kiss. So he's great at having that edgy, cool, but also articulate and musically catchy sound to him. The lyrics on these early songs are also decently on the poetic side. Nothing I'd care to interpret per se, but just it gets some images going in your head, whether it's a sort of the indecisive political character of Hell to Pay, or the sort of mood jumping psychedelic trip of Rapture in the Deep, which features this wonderful, fast moving kind of, I don't know, like Django Reinhardt maybe inspired little jazz riff. Bad Attitude, I guess I describe as kind of glam rock in that it's angry and aggressive, but with a very glittery sounds. And then you move through this album to the sort of middle of the band's history, the David Coverdale songs, which feel the closest to true metal, with the hard rock song Burn, sort of invoking imagery of witches and Soldier of Fortune, just feeling like this ballad a pseudo medieval figure would sing. I hear the lyrics about windmills going round, and I kind of picture Don Quixote. Smoke on the Water kind of caught me off guard because it was my first time actually listening to the lyrics outside of the chorus. And it's funny because it's a song that's about itself. The verse describes them traveling to Montreux, Switzerland to record his mobile studio. Like I'm reading about the making of this album, and then the lyrics of the song are literally describing it.
Luckily, however, there's more to the story than just recording in this mobile studio, which did happen to be owned by the Rolling Stones. While they were doing it, they watched this casino catch fire, seemingly because someone had fired a flare gun during a Frank Zappa concert.
Another interesting one on here is Fireball, uh, which, yeah, just sounds like one of these songs that's turning into metal, but isn't quite that extreme, kind of akin to the Beatles' Helter Skelter. But what's most interesting about it is the organ solo on it, which sounds like video game music, which is strange because this is from the early 70s. So I don't know if that solo in particular somehow is very inspirational to video game music. I assume it's just a coincidence of what keyboards sound like, but it's this fascinating historical oddity. And the very last song on this album, I lied before. I guess I did recognize it, but it's a song that I think was recorded by someone, Billy Royal, I think his name is, who's been kind of lost to the ages in the US. So Deep Purple did their own version, and yeah, it's this interesting in between psychedelic and country songs. So there's a great range of stuff on here, and again, some of the strongest stuff is the stuff that's done most recently. And who knows what version of the band you want to call Deep Purple? Can a thing be called a band when it's had, you know, three plus lead singers, including two who really left a mark on the group? It's three when it's had three plus lead singers. I don't know. You tell me. I get it's not really a correct answer to this. But yeah, let me know what you think of Deep Purple, this collection, if you have any favorite actual studio albums from the year. Look forward to hearing from you in the comments below. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. Don't know when next time will be, but I'm sure I'll have something fun to say one of these years.